Are you living in black and white or are you living in color? The truth is, most of us are somewhere in between. We're doing what we call living in the gray. We have one foot in, one foot out. We are holding back and playing small. The reality is, living in the gray is not going to get us the life, the business, and everything that we want. That's what we're talking about today. My guest is going to teach us how to first acknowledge and, more importantly, how to move out of living in the gray. I'm Clara Capano, and this is Clarity in Action. Welcome to Clarity in Action. This is the show where we have real conversations that are going to challenge your perspectives and drive real action. So if you are tired of holding back and you're ready to make bold moves, this is the show for you. Join us as we are going to take you from confusion into clarity. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Clarity in Action. You know, sometimes we aren't able to move forward, and many times that's due to nothing other than what's inside of us. And we have the ability to unlock ourselves. And that's what we're talking about today with my friend, Kari. So Kari, welcome to the show.
Oh, hey, thanks, Clara. Glad to be here today. We're going to have
I
fun
am
talking
so
about this.
excited. You know, you did a post a few weeks ago on Instagram, on LinkedIn rather, and it really stopped me in my tracks and got me thinking. And I was so moved by it that I really wanted to get you on the show. You know, you talk about this concept of what we call living in the gray, living in those moments where we have one foot in, one foot out, where we're starting to spiral and not moving forward. And you have some really great ways to both identify and move past this. Before we move into all of those, I would really just love to ask you, what was your moment of clarity that you woke up from living in the gray?
Oh, gosh. I think it was a combination of a few things, My story started with mostly gray area drinking.
Mhm.
And, most people don't even know that there's this gray area that exists in drinking. You're either an alcoholic or you're not. That's what we were taught. That's what I've been
Yep.
told. And if you have a problem with drinking, well, then my golly, you better go to a 12-step program and figure it out. So that's exactly what I did. And I realized it was not the best fit for me. It's an amazing program, but I didn't know what I was until I heard the term later on, gray area drinking. And that really woke me up to, okay, I need to work on my relationship with alcohol. And I did that. But what I didn't know at the time, no, Clara, was part of my gray area drinking was stemming from my gray area marriage and my gray area career and my gray area that I felt about myself with my own self-love and my gray area with my faith. So I had multiple gray areas. And when I started addressing gray area drinking and started coaching and talking about that, I realized that most of my clients, they had other gray areas that were the main driver. And so it was a light bulb moment for me, a year into my coaching, like, this is not just about gray area drinking. There's way more gray areas that we have in our life and that need to be addressed. And that was my story. And that's who I get to serve and help now is somebody who is in a severe gray area of their life.
And I think, you made a really great point that sometimes we don't even know it. You're either this or you're that. And I think sometimes that's why we're not able to go forward. And, you hit on so many other areas. We might feel dialed in one area, but again, living in the gray in others, meaning that we're not fully engaged, we're not fully happy or living in joy, just going through the motions. And I think that many times they would cycle and sort of feed into each other. And so we have to be aware of those things.
Yeah, mostly it's the word fine. I'm fine, I'm good, it's not that bad. And that's the dangerous part about being in the gray. But here's the differentiator, if you will, about being in the gray. It's a choice to be there. And in a way, that's a good thing, right? So it's not a choice when your spouse is already asking for the divorce. It's not a choice when you're fired, right? It's not a choice when you now have received a DUI or you hit somebody because of your drinking, right? Those things no longer become a choice. It's you're forced into some sort of change. And so my red flag warning sign has always been, or white flag, I guess it is. My warning sign is let it be your choice while you still have one. And that's the beautiful thing about the gray area. And it's both good and bad. Like we can exist in the gray area because that's what you're used to. And I like to refer that analogy almost of driving in fog. You're driving in fog and then all of a sudden the fog lifts and you're like, whoa, I can really see miles from now. That's the same effect. It's almost going from black and white to in living color. It's that much of a difference when you're out of the gray and you're living truly how you were designed to live and capable of living.
Fantastic. What a great analogy to, again, the black and white to the color and the driving in fog. What would you say if somebody's sitting back? Because you mentioned so many areas, again, marriage, job, drinking, all of those things. What would you say are maybe some, I'll call them warning signs that you might be living in the gray?
Well, first and foremost, I always go back to your gut. Like, I think everyone already knows something's quite not right. And a lot of times we're like, we're always finding excuses. So if you are that person who's, it's not that bad. I only drink on certain nights, or I only drink because I'm stressed out, or I'm overeating because of this, or my marriage is just like everyone else's. We're not intimate anymore, but who is really, right? Like, it's fine. We got the kids. We're good roommates. We got the chores divided in half. When you start making excuses for things, that is a significant red flag. And most often you already know. You already have that intuitive gnawing, if you will, at your soul that's telling you something's not quite right, but you're not willing to look in the mirror. And for me, part of my coaching is to really say, hey, let's look at the facts. Let's stop assuming and pretending things are good. Let's look under the hood. Let's be willing to look under the hood and see what's really going on. And that requires being honest. And a lot of people say, well, no, I am being honest, but are you really? So you already know, like I said, most often people know if they're in a gray area, they're just not willing to admit it. Right. Because they know that it's going to cause some pain. It's going to cause some sort of discomfort for them in order to get out of the gray. And that's what keeps people stuck. Yeah. Sometimes it's better to stay in the misery than it is to move out of it, especially when we're talking about making a lifestyle choice, whether it's with drinking or it is in a career situation or it's in a relationship situation. Sometimes it's easier just to keep your mouth shut, but that doesn't solve the problem.
Exactly. And we just say, at least I know what I have. At least I know what I'm dealing with. It's just easier, to stay here. And I think those ideas of the excuses, I can picture and running through in my brain some of the times where I was doing that, things such as, well, I need to stay at this job because it puts food on the table. Or if I don't do it, who else will do it? Or, it's better to at least have someone than to be alone. You look at those, or like you said, I know for me, when I went through my big bout with burnout, well, everybody's living this way. Everybody's overworked, and so you, like you said, you kind of put those blinders on because you're afraid, because if you be honest, you have to change. And we all know change is messy. So
absolutely. Change is messy. Change is messy and it's hard and it requires work. So like I said, sometimes it's easier just not to do it, but then it's a ripple effect. One gray area bleeds into the other gray areas that you have in your life. So, a lot of times clients will come to me originally because they want to talk to me about their drinking initially. And we find out that the drinking is really not the problem. We can nip that in the bud pretty dang quick. It's everything else. It's the underlying reasons. We find out, oh, it's the marriage. Oh, it's the fact that they're not confident in their job and their career. They're worried about money. They have, maybe they have some issues with their children and they're concerned about that. So it just, one thing leads into the next, and then it just compounds and becomes even a bigger problem, which is causing the reason they're drinking in the first place, or overeating, or whatever other self-sabotaging behavior they're doing.
Absolutely. So I'd love to talk about, when you stay in the gray, what are some of the effects that it can cause? You mentioned the idea of the ripple effect, that it'll go from one area to the others, but are there other, negative effects to wake us up to understand the detriment? Because like you said, it can be easier. We tell ourselves it's easier to stay here, but I guess, what is the cost of staying in the gray?
Yeah, the cost. There you go. You hit it on the head. The cost is huge. It can be very huge. I'll give you a couple client studies that I've done or currently working with or have worked with in the past. Is I'm thinking of one in particular. When he first started working with me, it was all about the drinking, but a lot of that was caused from stress. And then the stress was actually being caused from some past decisions that he made outside of the marriage. Part of that was also some stress with work. And so this all starts to compound, and it started inflicting on the self-confidence. So when you have each one of those areas, we're talking about potentially losing a business, potentially having a divorce, right? Which could be extremely costly, especially if you are in a pretty good financial situation. You can pretty much lose everything, right? So you have the cost of the divorce, you have the cost of your relationship with your kids, and the cost of your spiritual connection with God or something bigger, and dinging your own confidence in that same time, not to mention your health. So the health is another huge issue. We're talking about lack of sleep, lack of nutrients, lack of vitality and energy, and not taking care of yourself. It is so easy when you are in a self-sabotaging activity like drinking, where your inhibitions are so lowered and you just don't give a crap. And that's when you start making even dumber decisions, like, I'm going to eat a whole bag. And I say this because this was me. I'm going to eat, tortilla chips with salsa while I polish off this bottle of wine tonight. Right. And it's not only am I self-sabotaging with alcohol, now I'm self-sabotaging with food, and now it's interrupting my sleep. Mm-hmm. And this was my story. It was that was the crux of it. But all that stemmed from, I'm not happy with who the person is in the mirror. I'm not happy in my marriage. I'm not happy in my career. So again, it wasn't the drinking was the problem. Drinking was the Band-Aid, the so-called quote unquote Band-Aid, to help me work through all that stuff. And everything was compiling on each other. And then you get to a place of, my life is miserable, but I look like everyone else, so I must be fine.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And you put the happy face on.
Yeah.
And off you go.
And I think, it's important to take that reflection. I know when I was going through a divorce, it was, what is this costing me? And nothing against my ex-husband. He's a wonderful man. He just wasn't the right fit for me. And the cost was, I was becoming a shell of who I really wanted to be. I wasn't showing up present. I didn't want to be at home, so I wasn't getting the connections. I didn't want to go out, so I was losing relationships with my friends. I was starting to drink more. I was starting to overeat more, because all of those would sort of numb it. And like you said, I would go and I would look in the mirror, and I didn't like that person that was looking back at me. And, the cost was everything. It was the health. It was my business. It was my personal relationships. It was my love for myself. And honestly, the cost to my ex-husband, who I had love for, I was stealing from him too, because he deserved to be with somebody that he could be fully and authentically himself with. So I think, you have to really take that time to analyze and to reflect and to really say, okay, it seems that it's easier to just stay, but is it really? Again, what's the cost of it?
Exactly. And that's so typical for so many people. And again, it's hard to say to your spouse, like, hey, I'm not really happy. It's hard to look at yourself in the mirror and go, wow, I need to face my truth here. I'm gaining weight. Facts are facts. And when we start to really separate the facts over our feelings, we can really get to the crux of the root of it. And a lot of people don't want to do that work, because it requires you, again, to look under the hood. What is really going on? But if we start with the facts, and then we can see how we feel about those facts, we can change our focus, which will give us a different result. And so that is in a nutshell, how I help my clients, is to walk them through a process called the DECIDE method. And we start with understanding why you even have this desire in the first place, understanding the why behind it, exploring what that is. Because if you don't have a solidified why, the first thing that comes along that's going to challenge you, it's going to take you off course. So we have to know what those things are. Having a commitment to yourself, a true commitment, having the ability and the willingness to change yourself into somebody else. In other words, having an identity shift. Yeah. You have to become the person that you want to be before you become it. And that requires some daily habits that you need to do. And we're going to execute them on them every single day. That, my friend, is the DECIDE method that I take everybody through. And it's very important that we stay factual. We separate those facts from the feelings, like I said, so we can really understand what the focus needs to be.
And I love how you call it the DECIDE method, because I think, just a little tongue in cheek, people just say, well, just make the decision to stop. And it's easy said. And yes, that's a starting point. But I love how you took that and you really made a whole process out of it, because it does start with the decision.
Yeah.
Wondering if you can give us maybe some tactical things. You talk about looking under the hood. Is there an
Mhm.
exercise that you walk people through? Are there questions that maybe you ask people to ask themselves that, our listeners can take with them to maybe help them, and with some real tactical examples of how they can move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So I start everybody off with four core areas of their life. And the first one is body. And it's really important. We touched on a little bit, but your body represents so much. If you're not healthy, there's a saying out there like you have no problems. You can have all the problems in the world, but get sick or have an issue with your health, then you only have that one problem, right? Because if you don't have your health, you don't have much of anything. So we start with the body, and it's looking truly, what are all the facts? Again, going back to facts, what are the facts that are going on with you? What is your weight like? When was the last time you had your labs checked? What does your habits look like? What are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis? How do you sleep? What does that look like? What's your diet? How much are you working out? And it's all those things, because if you feel good, you look good, and that helps change a lot. You change in your state of being, your mindset. The fastest way to do that is moving your body. So exercise. So we really spend some time on how are you treating your body? Number one. The second core four area that I focus on is their being. And their being is all about their spiritual health. How connected are they to God or a higher power or the universe, whatever they want to call it? But how connected are you? And how connected are you to yourself? How much self-love do you have? How much honest reflection time are you doing? What are you doing? Are you in prayer? Are you in meditation? Are you spending that time to help grow your self-development growth? What does that look like? So we spend some time on that, of course. And then the next core four area is your balance, meaning your significant other first, then your kids. Then if you don't have a significant other or kids, then it's the family and friends. Community is very, very important, but your significant other, your spouse particularly, has to be the most important, because you've made this communion partnership with them, whether you're married or not. Is there is somebody important to you in your life, they have to be number one, and then if you have kids together, your kids are very important too, right? But you got to take care of your partner first. It was the two of you before it was your kids. So focusing on that. And then again, if you don't have either, then friends and family, they play a huge part. But we have to know, who are we spending the most time with? Are they edifying us? Are they building us up? And what does that look like? And that affects a lot of our habits that we are doing. It affects our mental well-being. So we need to understand how those relationships, and are they healthy relationships? Are you dating your spouse? Are you dating your kids? What are you doing? So looking at all that. And again, the habits that are attached to our relationships is just as important to the habits that we're doing inside our bodies, for our bodies and for our being. And the last one is our business world. What does that look like for you? Are you aligned well with your particular job? I offer something to my clients. It's a deep assessment. We look at 13 unique traits that they have to see if they're well positioned, and if they're in a healthy position in terms of what they do, not just in their work environment, but for their overall enjoyment and everything that they do. If they know themselves, they can lead themselves so much better. So a lot of my work is not just focusing on the gray areas, but for them to understand themselves at a deep level, so they're able to lead themselves at a higher level.
Yeah.
So a lot of my work is finding those gray areas in our business as well. So we have gray areas in
Mhm.
all core four that I just mentioned, and it's identifying each one and putting that into practice. And we got to start with the facts. When we start with the facts, we know what we're dealing with, and that's very uncomfortable.
It
That
is.
can be very uncomfortable, but that's where the rubber starts to meet the road. Then we can make some significant
Right.
improvements.
And what I really appreciate that you're doing is, you're doing this with them and creating that safe space without judgment. Because I think looking at the facts, as you just mentioned, can be really scary. But when you are in a place where you're eliminating the judgment, you're just looking at the facts. They're not good, they're not bad, they just are. I think that's what gives us the ability and the security to then start building the confidence. So once we have the
Mhm.
clarity, we can then start building the confidence to move forward. And as you went through those four, which I love, body, being, balance, and business. A couple of things that came up for me is, the importance of body. You talk about that. We're only given one body, and we can't serve
Mhm.
when we are not whole. And we need to take care of us. And when we are out of alignment, oftentimes ourself is the last thing that we take care of. And we have to change our mindset to the importance of investing in ourselves and our well-being to be able to put the other things through. And then I love the balance and how you hit on the idea of community. I think
Mhm.
people do not put enough emphasis on this. When you talked about the significant other, I want to applaud you. I remember that was something that I learned from my parents. They always made time for each other, and they said, we love you kids, but we're a unit. And they
Mhm.
knew they had to take care of it. And like you said, you both came before the kids. And I think it's imperative that couples take more time to nurture their relationships because they can get lost. And that's what then starts the disconnection. And, you fell in love with each other at one point in time. There's still love there. Let's work on nurturing it. And then if you don't have a significant other, again, connection. Now, I'm a single empty nester. Connection is still key, especially since I'm on the road so much. So,
Yeah.
really leaning in and creating my community, whether it's phone calls, virtual coffees, being a part of things, it's so important to have that. And that is a big part of putting us together. So, I think that you just hit things spot on. And I just want to say, from listening to all of this, starting off from something you said early is, are you living in black or white, or are you living in color? And I'll just tell you, I don't want to be living in black and white anymore. I don't even want to be living in the gray. I want to be living fully engaged and doing amazing work and, living on all cylinders and living in color. So I just am so just excited for what you're doing, because I think there are too many people living in the gray in so many different areas, and you are giving them a way out and giving them permission to know that it's okay. Because I think sometimes people, well, I guess let me ask you this. I feel sometimes people feel guilty for living in color.
Oh yes, I think a lot of times they purposely, want to stay in the misery that they're in because it's almost of a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, my
Mhm.
life is so terrible, and so if it's terrible, they can say that it's terrible, and it's a way of getting attention. I mean, unfortunately, I see this happening, or they have the victim mentality, and sometimes they don't know any better, and I've witnessed that for people in my life that I've seen, and it's a shame. But the crux of all of this, Clara, honestly, is living with intention and living with intentionality. It's if we spend every day thinking about our day, it's going to change everything. So one of the exercises that I give all my clients, and I do myself every night, is I spend at least 5 to 10 minutes before I go to bed in my journal, and I don't typically write a book unless I have something that's really special that happened that day or whatever, but I write down 3 core things. And I have a client who named these wigs. That's the acronym for the wigs. So the wig is wins. We start with the wins. What happened during the day that was really awesome? And this helps our brain recap the day and find what we can celebrate. And we can look for things that were challenging as well. We can write those down. But finding those wins is really important. It gives you momentum. And that's very helpful for you to get clear on what it is that you're doing that's working well. So that's very important. The second one is intentions. That's the I in wigs. Intentions. What are your intentions the next day? So journaling this out, it's more than just looking at your calendar and writing down your to-do list or your schedule for the next day, although that I do that, but it's how you want to show up for that. So like last night, podcast with Clara tomorrow, and it's the intentionality of showing up on time, making sure my mic is ready, making sure that, I have a client right before that I make sure that have a hard stop. So I'm ready for you. It's little things like that. It's the intentionality that's put into it that sets us up for success that will get us more wins. So intentions is huge. And then lastly, the G is gratitude. We need to really end our day in gratitude. It helps us sleep better. It helps us be grateful and thankful. A thankful heart is a beautiful heart, and it makes us happy and whole. And so doing these wigs every night is an important process that I ask my clients to do. Instead of being on their phone, doom scrolling, put the phone down, put down all your screens, spend some time with just you, dumping out instead of inputting, let's like output. I was going to say exput, output onto our journal. And then it gives our brain something to really focus on while we sleep that's good for us rather than all the negativity and the problems that we might have experienced during the day. We're focusing on the good things. And I think that's a huge shift for a lot of people. Small change, big rewards.
Love that. Fantastic. Well, Kari, this has just been amazing. You've given us so much to think about, and more importantly, some tools that are very practical to be able to help us. So I'm excited to share those with the audience. Before we go, I would just love to ask, what is next for you? What are some of the exciting things you're working on now?
Oh my goodness. I have been doing retreats, client retreats, and I am just loving this process. I have a new one coming up. I did a big fall retreat for clients last fall. I got a couples retreat coming up. I have one in the fall that I'm going to be doing. So those are really fun. And my 30-day program called Decide 30, which is a great way to start working on your gray areas. And it's a 30-day commitment in a group, and you get me every single day. So it's a great support. And so those are my big things that I'm working on right now. And it's awesome.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to support you, and we're going to put all your information in the show notes. So if any of our listeners are interested in working with you, learning more about you, being part of your program, they can get access there. And one final question before I let you go today. Kari, sitting where you sit today, learning everything that you've learned up until this point in time, how do you define success for yourself now?
What I just shared before is the intentionality. If I do everything with intention, I am golden. I mean, this is even down to working out at the gym, doing my exercises the right way, specific way, being intentional and mindful and bringing that awareness to everything that I do. That's how I stay successful.
Fantastic. Well, Kari, you've just been an amazing guest. I am proud to call you my friend, even though we have never met officially in person. You bring so much light each and every day with what you're doing. You lead with your heart. You lead with that intention and gratitude that we talk about. And you really are here to unlock greatness in everyone. And I just wanted to say how much I honor you and the work that you're doing. So keep doing amazing things.
Thank you so much, Clara.
Take care. This conversation with Kari brought up so many things for me, and so many times that I have sabotaged myself and lived in the gray on my own. And sitting where I am now, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I am so much more fulfilled, so much more myself, so much more in alignment, because I finally had the courage to bust out of living in the gray and start to live in the light. So some of the things is, you have to be real. Sitting down and doing that real assessment. What isn't working? Take the judgment off it. Just write a list. You don't have to share this list with anyone, but until you take time to truly be honest, you cannot move forward. So looking under the hood and doing that self-assessment, and then starting to pay attention to what is the cost of staying in the gray? Because it might seem easier today, but in the long run, it's not going to serve you. And you don't want to wake up 5 years, 10 years, 30 years from now saying, I wish I would have. Your life matters. Your life is important. You need to be living it fully engaged and to its highest level. So focus on what is the cost. Getting out of those excuses, paying attention to what are the excuses you're giving, because those could be lights that those are, holding you back and sabotaging. I loved her 4 areas of checking in. Check in with your body, check in with your being, check in with your balance, and then checking in with your business. Are we in harmony in those areas? Are we feeding those areas and paying attention, and then bringing that word intentional in and making sure that each and every day you're living with intention? So my hope for you is that this is getting you thinking. There might be some areas that you're putting the brakes on. Don't live with the brakes on. You've earned the right to live your life fully engaged. And that is what I would love for each of you. So start with the assessment, look under the hood, be bold, be brave, be courageous, and go out there and start living your life fully, 100% in Technicolor. So please make sure to like, follow, and let's share this with at least 5 other people that that might be struggling and living in the gray. And my name is Clara Capano. This has been another episode of Clarity in Action.